All right, to continue to talk about this ALDS victory, the Blue Jays over the Yankees in 4 games. Here's Bryan Hayes, the host of Overdrive on TSN Radio. So the bullpen game, Bryan, 8 pitchers to get it done, holding the Yankees just 2 runs on 6 hits. What can you say about the job that Pete Walker and John Schneider did on Wednesday night?
I honestly don't think I could say enough. I could sit here and talk all night with you, Jay, and I can't tell you how impressed I am with what Schneider executed tonight, obviously working with pitching coach Pete Walker, and obviously the arms, right? 8 different arms went out there, and they all got the job done, holding the Yankees to the stats you just suggested in a closeout game at Yankee Stadium. But for John Schneider, this is a masterclass. This is a crown jewel moment for the manager. For him to be able to navigate through this Yankees lineup that is so potent and, again, so desperate at Yankee Stadium was the managerial equivalent of hitting for the cycle. That's what John Schneider and company accomplished tonight. I can't tell you how impressed I am, and I can't tell you how surprised I am. I wasn't sure this would happen, considering the bullpen has been reason for anxiety all season long. It's been a talking point all year. How is this bullpen going to hold up? This is as tough as it gets, what they faced tonight, and they got the job done. We know what they did in Game 3. We know what they did at times in Game 2, even though the game was over at that point. Yet they go out there with Louis Varland. We saw what he was in Game 3, and whether it was Eric Lauer giving them 5 outs or Dominguez coming in and giving them 1, and anything in between, they got the job done. So I credit the organization for having the courage to go with this, doing the opener, going with a bullpen game, as opposed to just saying, forget it, we're going to give the ball to Max Scherzer, or we're going to give the ball to Chris Bassett. They chose not to do that. It was a bold move. It was a risky move. But John Schneider, his staff, and all the arms tonight, they pulled it off. It was just an incredible job.
And then Vladimir Guerrero Jr., no longer are the playoffs an albatross for him. He was sensational. This is maybe the biggest story for the Blue Jays this entire series, is how Vladdy Jr. broke out. What impressed you the most, Bryan Hayes, about Vladdy Jr. in the ALDS?
I think it was the maturity, the leadership, and the fact that he was ready to go right from the start of Game 1. He was on his toes as opposed to being on his heels. And you mentioned it, in past playoff performances, it wasn't very good for Vladdy. It wasn't very good down the stretch for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And his probably most notable moment of playoff performance prior to this series was getting picked off on second base in Minnesota Game 2. And that was an immature player. And he's still a very young guy, relatively speaking, very young guy. But that was an immature play. And what he did this series was nothing but maturity and professionalism and leadership. And what he supplied was moments. And that's ultimately what's going to be remembered, right? And we'll get to it in a moment, how you compare this to 15 and the 16 teams. And no one remembers, specific details of what happened in the 3rd inning of Game 4 back in 15. No one remembers that kind of stuff. They remember moments. And what Vladimir Guerrero Jr. did throughout these 4 games was supply moments every single game. 3 home runs, including the grand slam in Game 2. The Superman slide into home base in Game 3, which luckily for him and for history doesn't get lost in the shuffle, because even though the Jays lost Game 3, they win Game 4, win the series, so that becomes a heroic moment. And that's really what sticks out. Vladdy's arrival, the playoff performer, was Vladimir Guerrero Jr. through 4 games, and he supplied moment after moment after moment that will never be forgotten for Blue Jay fans. And luckily for him, and luckily for Blue Jay fans, they're still going.
Yeah, they still are going. You mentioned those 2015, 2016 teams, Bryan. Beloved by the fan base for sure. Also went to the ALCS. What will it take for this team to cement itself in the fan base's love, just the same way those 2015, 2016 teams really captured and captivated this fan base?
I think they probably have to go one more step further. I think they've got to probably get to the World Series. And that may sound unfair, but I think the reasoning is actually about the history between 93 and 15. And that's what made 15 so great. The Jays hadn't been in the playoffs in 22 years. So you don't go to the playoffs for that long. It became this triumphant accomplishment just getting there. And them acquiring who they acquired at the trade deadline. And then they went on a heater down the stretch. And they were led by superstars. right? Donaldson won the MVP in 15, and Bautista is an all-time great J, and Edwin is an all-time great J, and they had David Price, and they had, Troy Tulowitzki and Russell Martin, and they had R.A. Dickey who had won a Cy Young. So they had all these big names, larger-than-life figures on that team, where this team has a different reputation and a different vibe. It's kind of like Vladdy and a bunch of misfits. And I say that respectfully, of course, to George Springer, who's not a misfit and is a great, great player, has had a great career, had an unbelievable season. Alejandro Kirk obviously has been an all-star before, was great this year. Shane Bieber, has won a Cy Young before. Gosman's certainly not a misfit. But Nathan Lucas is, and Ernie Clement is, and Addison Barger is, and Eric Lauer is, and I could go on and on and on. Miles Straw is. They all factored in tonight. They were all great tonight. They were all great throughout the series. So for that to happen, it's just got to keep going and going and going. And if you'll recall, in 15 in particular, they lost the first 2 games to Texas. So there was this downfall the first 2 games, and then they dragged everyone back in and built it back up. This was just pure dominance by the Blue Jays. And I think this should be remembered or revered in a way that is almost unprecedented, because they dummied the New York Yankees, not the Texas Rangers, not the Cleveland Guardians or whoever else, the Baltimore Orioles. They destroyed the New York Yankees, Game 1, Game 2, and Game 4, and they handed them Game 3 with self-inflicted wounds. They should have swept this team. So I think as the dust settles, we'll look at this series in particular as obviously an all-time great moment and a truly incredible experience of your fan base. But they have met where those 15 and 16 teams got to. They got to the championship series, but there was a 22-year gap in between it, and the players and the personalities were a little bit different. I think the Jays are 4 wins away from pushing the 15 and 16 teams aside. And this is something I never thought I'd say this year. I can't believe we're in the position we're in right now with this team. But if they win 4 more games, Jay, it's not about comparing these guys to Bautista and Donaldson and Tulowitzki. It'll be comparing them to Alomar and Olerud and Molitor and Carter. And those are truly crazy statements when you consider what those players represent to the city of Toronto.
It's so true. And maybe the sneaky best part of the bullpen game, Hazy, is that Trey Savage and Kevin Gausman were available in the bullpen, but John Schneider didn't have to use them. So presumably they'll be good to go for games 1 and 2 of the ALCS beginning Sunday in Toronto. This is Bryan Hayes.